Yes, the Leafs won, but it was ugly. Hayes, last night you posted Leafs in control, and they just completely melt down defensively. We've seen this a lot the last couple of weeks. So, Bryan, that said, how can this team stop the constant mental lapses?
Well, I think there's a few different ways. First and foremost, getting Chris Tanev, back in the lineup will be significant. But just missing out on Tanev is not an excuse for the veteran defensemen playing the way that they're playing. And I would specifically look at the left shot defensemen, Morgan Riley, Jake McCabe, Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Since the Four Nations, the three of them have just simply not played well enough. And they're all veterans. They're all savvy. They're all healthy. They're all mobile. And they're all making glaring mistakes almost on a nightly basis. And it's costing their team. And again, you get Tanev back. Brandon Carlos here. It's going to take him a little bit of time to figure this out. And Philippe Myers is trying to figure out who he is in the NHL. So you look at three veteran left shot defensemen, whether it's gap control, whether it's just missing assignments or missing checks or being soft on checks in front of the net, in the corners. These guys are all capable of being better. They have to be better. I think that's where a lot of the issues are starting. But I'd also look at the possession game, Craig, and up front, the Leafs are getting out-possessed basically every single game, again, since the Four Nations. And they found a way to pick up some points, but they've blown leads. They've allowed the opposition to really pick up a lot of momentum during games because they're just simply not playing enough hockey in the opponent's zone. And Craig, you know it as well as anybody does. If you're going to play like that come Thursday night when Florida's in town, the Leafs are going to be in big trouble.
Well, they got pumped by the Vegas Golden Knights. They got pumped by the Colorado Avalanche, Stanley Cup contenders. So if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs and you're looking at how you played in those two games specifically, not anywhere near good enough. And Bryan, you make a point about possession. So why don't you have possession? Well, you're not holding pucks, you're not retrieving pucks, and now you're creating opportunities for the other team to go the other way. The game versus Colorado on Saturday night, it should have been 15-4. Stolarz was unbelievable in that game because Toronto, even up in that game, were not in the game. Then they go into Utah. They're up 3-0, and they let that one go away. The commitment to defense is not about anything more than effort. I'm going to get to the dangerous spaces before my opponent does. I'm going to be strong on a puck. I'm going to make sure that I'm not making risky plays. And the Toronto Maple Leafs, to a player on the blue line, even up front, they've been sloppy. That's a word that keeps coming to mind. We can talk about the San Jose game. They blew a lead in that game. They nearly blew it against Utah on Monday night. So when you start to talk about Florida Thursday night, yeah, that should scare you a little bit. But what should scare them even more is this is simply not good enough. And for a team that had some struggles with respect to playoff scoring, this has got to be more concerning right now because the defensive part of the game and the ability for teams to never feel they're out of it against the Toronto Maple Leafs, not a good way to be getting your game in order as you head to the playoffs.
I want to follow up on the goaltending. Anthony Stolar's next start is going to match his career high for an entire season. Joseph Woll blew by his career high 10 starts ago. Hayes, are these goalies just wearing down, and is this becoming a legitimate concern?
Well, I think it was always going to be a concern all year because it's uncharted territory. You just referenced the stat. Anthony Stolarz has never started this many games as an NHL goalie. Joseph Woll's in a very similar position, and their statistics are starting to fade a little bit. Woll, in particular, in the second half. Stolarz, coming off that injury, had played very, very well, and up until recently was leaking a little bit of oil. But I think it also has to be compounded with what we've just been talking about here, guys. The fact that defensively they're hanging these guys out to dry a lot. And the players are coming out after the game. They're having team meetings saying, we got to be better than this. They're giving up odd man rushes. They're giving up wide open tap-ins, side door. No goalie on earth is going to stop those shots. So, yes, they're leaking oil a little bit in terms of Woll and Stolarz. Yes, they're moving into uncharted territory in terms of the amount of play and what they're going to look like down the stretch. But ultimately, that was always going to be the case because these guys have never been here before. And if you compare and contrast the mentality and possibly the anxiety or the concern that Craig Berube would have compared to what Paul Maurice or John Cooper would have down in Florida and Tampa, it's very different. Paul Maurice knows what Bobrovsky's going to do, right? John Cooper knows what Vasilevsky's going to do. There's still debate in Toronto over who's going to be the starter come game one. So they got to figure that out. And once they get to the playoffs, Craig, whoever's going to be the starter, and I think it's in their best interest to pick one guy, he's got to play every other night. So until we get there and until they really punch that ticket and see what they're going to do with all of these starts that they've never had before, it's up in the air in terms of how the goalies are going to play and how they're going to perform. And the best way to help them is to defend better, as we've been saying.
Yeah, to me, this is a tandem operation, Brian, and I appreciate the idea that you might have to name a goaltender and run with them. I'm not so sure that the Toronto Maple Leafs have to be married to that. If they feel comfortable with that, by all means. But we go back to it. Stolarz has had a fantastic season. Joseph Wall, I think, has had a really good, strong season. You mentioned it, and what's in front of those two goaltenders is the problem. And when you're exposing your goaltender to these high danger chances, quality shots from the slot, you're getting pressed and pressed and pressed and pressed. You're asking your goaltender now to fix every single problem. They got too many pipes that are leaking, and fixing one pipe is not going to fix the bigger problem. This has to be a commitment to defensive play, and it starts with being competitive all over the ice. And that means being strong on the puck, getting to better position to your opponent so that you don't put an unnecessary burden on your goaltenders. Because if that's going to happen, I don't care if you put Patrick Waugh, Ken Dryden, Dominic Hasek in the net, it's not going to help.
Fair enough. Huge one coming up for the Leafs on Thursday, the first of 3 meetings against the division-leading Panthers. Whoever wins this 3-game set, huge opportunity to finish first and get a weaker opponent in the opening round of the playoffs. So it's big.